Hi guys, welcome to the first video on this channel. My other channel just got shut down for a BS reason, for a guy that basically said, yeah, this is copyright, and I cannot do anything about it because it's total shit. And yeah, so I decided to start a new channel, and that's it basically. And yeah, let's get into the first video on this channel. This is What If Issei Awakened His Sacred Gear Earlier, Part 1. So yeah, hope you all guys enjoyed this video. Hope to see you next. Let's get into the video.
Hyuda. Blinking, Issei slowly looks up, lazily regarding the two girls who have stopped in front of his desk. With his face propped up in the palm of his hand, he easily manages the appearance of someone completely disinterested with the world. Yes? Despite him not doing anything beyond acknowledging their presence and questioning what they want, his mere attention is enough to make both Murayama and Kataise, the captains of the girls' Kendo club, go slightly pink. Blushing a bit, the two share a glance for a moment, as if to draw strength from one another. In the end, it's Murayama who speaks for the both of them, the long-haired brunette steeling her nerves and clenching her jaw. Issei Hyuda, on behalf of the girls' Kendo club, we request that you attend our club meeting after school. Raising a single eyebrow, Issei regards Murayama, and then Kataise. Is this for the same thing as before? The blushes go from pink to red at that, and Kataise steps in. Why yes. We require your presence for a demonstration we wish to put on for the club. Issei just nods to show he understands. Do the same terms as before apply then. Here, the Kendo captains go positively incandescent. They lose all ability to make eye contact with him or each other, instead crossing their arms over their chests. Murayama is quite substantial, though Kataise is lacking, and look to either side. In the end, Murayama speaks up. Why yes. The same terms as before apply. Letting out a sigh, Issei nods and waves a casual hand. Fine. I'll be there. Gee good. Don't be late. And like that, the two young women hurry away, just moments before homeroom is set to start. At the same time, Issei can feel glaring eyes, burrowing into his back. He doesn't need to look behind him to know that Matsuda and Motohama are giving him death glares. The pair of boys, nicknamed by the students of Kyoha Academy as, those horrible perverts, very much had it in for Issei, in the same way they had it in for a pretty boy like Kiba. But Issei thought they might hate him even more than Kiba. After all, Kiba's good looks, chivalrous attitude, and all-around kind personality were good indicators for why girls liked him. They might not have liked it, but at the very least, Matsuda and Motohama couldn't deny that Kiba had everything they didn't. Issei on the other hand, outwardly, Issei knew he was incredibly average. He wasn't ugly by any means, but he wasn't a pretty boy like Kiba either. And more than that, he wasn't at all chivalrous or kind. He was somewhat lazy, and perhaps a bit non-confrontational, but when he was poked, it didn't matter who you were in for a smackdown. Which was why all Matsuda and Motohama would do was glare. Because they knew if they tried anything else, he would hurt them. Outwardly, Issei Hyuda might not have looked like much, but the phrase, "don't judge a book by its cover," had never been more apt. Heh, those girls just can't get enough of us. Outwardly, Issei just stares out the classroom window as the final bell rings and everyone sits down. Inwardly, he lets a tendril of amusement creep out to show he heard his resident. At the same time though, who does Drake think he's fooling? It's Issei that those girls can't get enough of. Drake has nothing to do with it. Pa. Don't be ridiculous. Do you really think you would be able to draw in such maidens if not for me? It is our connection that gives you such immense power. Those of the female gender cannot help being drawn to that power. Well, he couldn't exactly refute that. Issei had seen the results himself, ever since he'd started on Kyoha Academy. They pretended otherwise, but he was no fool. He'd seen how the girls of the academy, which was predominantly female anyways thanks to the fact that it had only recently become mixed gender, looked at him. How they acted around him. Murayama and Kataise were just the first to act upon their desires. Not that Issei minded one bit. Of course, you don't. As a dragon, all that exists around you is yours by right, so long as you are strong enough to take it. And we, my boy, are very strong. That actually does bring the smallest smile to Issei Hyuda's face. He slowly curls a hand into a fist, feeling the power pulsing through him. The dragon scales that sit right beneath his flesh, shifting, grinding against one another, all too eager to escape. In a moment, he could level not just this entire classroom, but the whole school. But he wouldn't. That would just be plain rude. Issei wasn't a bad guy. He had no desire to hurt anyone. But, ever since that day, all those years ago, he had learned that, in order to protect himself, he had to be strong. In order to stand above the rest, he had to be powerful. XXX. Pain, so much pain. Little Issei Hayado, no older than 4, didn't understand why he was in so much pain. Stupid little brat. You fucking deserve every bit of this. Thinking you're better than me. Thinking you're worth anything. It was just supposed to be a family trip. But little Issei had been separated from his parents. He'd wandered about, until eventually, he'd gone too far in the wrong direction. The Hayado family was by no means rich, but they were well off. A boy of Issei's age wearing such fine clothes in a bad neighborhood like he'd found himself in, it'd only taken one spiteful homeless man, hopped up on some sort of drug, to make Issei's day a whole lot worse. Now, he hurt all over. And he continued to hurt too, because the man was still kicking him, in the chest, in the stomach, in between the legs. Issei was curled up, trying to protect himself, his face, his whatever, but his tiny little hands weren't enough. One was broken, in fact, not that Issei even understood that. Several of his ribs were broken too, but once again, Issei had never experienced a broken bone in his very young life at that point. It was all just pain for the boy, so much pain, unending pain, he wanted it to stop. He just wanted it to stop. Do you? You're going to die, boy. How pathetic is that? One of my wielders, dying before his 5th birthday. The words cut through the pain. They cut through everything, almost pounding against the inside of young Issei's head. But rather than shy away from this new sensation, the little boy grasps at it. What else can he do? It's not as bad as everything else, after all. Anything to end the pain is worth reaching towards. Oh? What's this? Perhaps you're not as pathetic as I first thought. However, when he grabs at the words, when he pulls on them, something else answers him. Something immense. Something massive. There's a thing in his soul, contained within a prison, and it's roaring to be let out. It dwarfs little Issei's consciousness, it dwarfs all of him. That's right, boy. Keep going. Release me, and I shall save you. Except, even if this immense thing inside of him was bigger than him, bigger than everything that made Issei who he was at the tender age of 4, he was still holding it in. And something told him he had power over it. Control over it. He didn't need to release it, or beg it, or plead with it. He just had to take. Help me. Help me. It is not a request. It is not a plea. It is an order, and it is backed up with an iron will beyond a little boy of Issei's years. Oh ho ho, very well then. It seems I have no choice. Back in the real world, the homeless man laying into Issei Hayado with the intent of ending the little boy's life, though he is growing a bit tired of waiting for the cries to finally stop, finds himself suddenly halted in his advance. His foot, it's caught. Eyes wide, the vagabond stares at where the boy is holding his boot. Get off, you stupid little brat. Fuck, let go. In response, all the man gets is a growl, and then he watches as what he thought was a little boy, becomes something else entirely. All the man sees before the end is red scales, claws, fangs, and golden slitted eyes as a whirling devilish of a creature slams into him with ferocity unmatched. His life ends soon after that, his throat torn out by those fangs, his flesh rent by those claws. He died, and Issei Hayado lived. As the little boy's body shifted back, miraculously healed, the pain gone, all Issei could do was stare down at the man he'd just made go quiet. The man's eyes are open, and yet, he says nothing, gurgling instead as blood bubbles up from both his lips and the hole Issei has put in his throat. He's dying. You've killed him. Issei stiffens up as the presence presses against his mind. Slowly, he curls blood-covered hands into fists and grits his jaw as he pushes back on the immensity of whatever is housed within his soul. You are intriguing, little one. I foresee this being the start of a beautiful relationship. XXX. And so, it was. That day had been the day Issei met Drake. Not that he'd understood everything at the tender age of 4, but he'd learned. He'd had to, because in the end, it was do or die. Drake had pushed him hard, and slowly but surely, Issei had learned to be worthy of the power he'd used to save himself that day. He'd learned to be worthy of the title Red Dragon Emperor. Yet, at the same time, Issei really didn't want to pick too many fights with anyone. Drake was of a similar mind, as it turned out. Whether it was because his personality bled into the dragon, or because the dragon's personality bled into him, they'd taken up a rather lazy sort of lifestyle. Perhaps it was both of them bleeding into each other. Either way, Issei didn't have any desire to seek out other dragons, not even the one Drake called his rival, Albion, the White Dragon Emperor. He also had no desire to get involved with other parts of the supernatural, of which he'd learned of many from Drake. And yes, he also knew that there were 2 devil peerages at Kuah. That didn't mean Issei had to get involved with them. He'd flown under their radar well enough so far, had he not? It was Mr. Hyuda. Blinking, Issei is pulled out of his inner thoughts by the sound of his teacher calling his name. He looks up to the front, making eye contact with the woman, and waits patiently for her to follow up. Of course, she blushes the moment that he actually directs his attention to her, something no one in the class fails to notice as she fidgets a bit. Whatever she might have said before is lost in those following moments, and in the end, what she does manage to stammer out is lackluster at best. Please try to pay attention, alright? Issei doesn't even know her name. He can't be bothered to remember it. Sure, she's cute, but she's also a teacher. They're probably off limits. If she went out of her way to spend more time with him out of class, he'd learn it, but school was utterly pointless in his eyes. He wasn't exactly destined for the normal life, no matter how lazy he was. He might not be interested in the affairs of the supernatural, but he hadn't spent his entire life training with Drake in order to be a salaryman or anything like that. Still, no point in completely disrespecting the woman. Issei gives a slight nod, and then endeavors to stare forward as he daydreams and tunes out the world, making it at least seem like he might just be paying attention to what's going on in the classroom. In reality, his mind is elsewhere, but if his teacher realizes this, she doesn't call him out on it again. XXX. With school over, Issei makes his way over to the Kendo club. It's a bit of a bother, perhaps, but it's also worth it, in his eyes. After all, the deal that he has with Murayama and Katase is one that benefits him most of all. Not that the 2 girls don't get something out of it. They definitely do, or they wouldn't keep coming back to him for this. Still, they're a bit weird, aren't they? What a strange fetish. There you are. Come stand at the front please, Hyuda. Issei just nods his head and walks in, moving past the rows of girls who sit seize a position. Every last one of them blushes in his presence, though he also notes the way their knuckles go white as they clutch at the practice swords that they hold across their laps. He doesn't pay them any mind. If they want to attack him, he'll defend himself. It's why he's here, after all. Right. As before, we've asked Hyuda here for a demonstration. This time, we will be showing you the value of always pairing up. If there are 2 of you, no man can harm you. Katase and I will be going at Hyuda with everything we've got, and you'll see that he will crumble before our combined might. Understood? Yes, Captain. The entire room cries out as one, even as Issei raises an eyebrow at Murayama and Katase. The 2 girls blush a bit when they see him doing so, but they also tighten their jaws, showing their determination. The last 2 times that they'd asked him here, they'd come at him one at a time, attempting to show that a master of Kendo was a match for any untrained boy. Of course, Issei was far from untrained, he just wasn't any good with a sword. Needless to say, he'd defeated both girls each time, and extracted the price they'd offered him for attending the class as well for good measure. Of course, neither of the 2 Kendo captains had complained as he deflowered them. In fact, they'd seemed to enjoy it, as embarrassed as they both were to be beaten by him. The first go-around, he'd fucked them separately. The second go-around, he'd taken them together, and Issei had to admit, having the 2 girls able to hold hands and stare at one another for support had certainly enhanced the process. This time. Prepare yourself, Hyuda. Here we come. And like that, Murayama and Katase were upon him, their bamboo swords striking from opposite sides in eerie synchronicity. They were good. He could give them that. But they were also only human. Issei casually lifts an arm to block the blow from Katase, even as his hand latches out and catches the Murayama's bamboo sword right at the hilt. His hand actually closes around Murayama's as he squeezes slightly, causing her to cry out and let go of her sword with that particular hand. Issei tears it free of her weakened grasp at that point and turns the bamboo sword on Katase without a second thought. There's no technique to it. He is not a swordsman. He simply begins to rain down blows on Katase as she yelps and tries to block, only to find him faster and stronger than her, if not nearly as skilled in his technique. To her credit, Murayama is not so weak-willed as to give up just because she's been disarmed. Seeing her friend under assault by her own weapon, the long-haired brunette lets out a roar and leaps at Issei's back, clinging to him from behind as she tries to distract him, perhaps. It's clear she hasn't thought it through, even as Issei pauses for a moment to reach back, grab her by the scruff of her gi, and throw her over him. Murayama hits the mat hard, but then, that's kind of why it's there, to soften falls. Issei though, is not done. He steps up as she's recovering and places the tip of her own bamboo sword against her throat, pressing down until she starts to choke a little. Her hands come up to grab the blade to try and get it off, but Issei is unrelenting, and Murayama isn't willing to outright break her own practice sword. As it is, he's not truly hurting her, merely applying some pressure. Katace, meanwhile, has taken all of this time to recover from the onslaught he'd had her under. When she finally catches her breath, it's to find her fellow Kendo captain in such a situation, and Issei's gaze upon her. That gaze pins her in place, and Issei cocks his head to the side as he regards Katace for a second. Then, he speaks a single word. Surrender. The power behind that word is directly solely at Katace. As such, Murayama is still in a proper state of mind to fight back. And no. Don't listen to High Dash. With a clatter, Katace interrupts Murayama as she drops her own weapon to the mat, before kneeling down and bowing her head in surrender. The long-haired brunette is all set to explode at her friend, but then Issei directs his gaze at her, and she too goes limp. As he pulls the tip of the bamboo sword from her throat, Murayama slowly gets to her knees alongside Katace, head bowed in surrender. Slowly, Issei turns to regard the rest of the all-female Kendo club. They're all watching this, faces red. By this point, they know what happens when Murayama and Katace fight against Issei. They know what the end result is going to be. Though, they don't know what comes next. From the looks on some of their faces, some of them might enjoy finding out. Issei considers things for a moment. He has a choice to make now. And as far as he can see, there are 3 options he's willing to take at this moment. Well, there's always the 4th opt. There were 3 options he was willing to take at this moment. Heh, fine. Yeah, prude. Issei just smiles slightly. He and Drake both knew he was far from a prude. But even a horny dragon knew better than to try and reverse gangbang an entire Kendo club. Not all of them would be willing, for one. However, extracting his price, or at least part of it, from Katace and Murayama in front of the club, now there was an idea that held merit. He could demand that Murayama and Katace let him have his way with them right here, and right now. Issei had a feeling they would go along with it. They were kinky like that, he knew that already from when he fucked them together alone. Or, the second option, he could fuck them together alone again. Make them dismiss the Kendo club, and then have his way with them both right here in their dojo. He knew they would both enjoy that too, from prior encounters. Finally, the third option, he could do nothing at all. He could leave them here, and refrain from extracting his price from them this time around. They clearly wanted him to fuck them. They were insistent on constantly challenging him, despite the both of them knowing he was beyond their skill level at this point. If they wanted to be fucked, maybe he should deny them that. See what came of it, if he refused them what they desired. Decisions. Coming to a decision, Issei clears his throat, causing both Murayama and Katace to look up at him, startled. Well. You asked me to come here again. I won, again. I'll be taking my payment for my time now. They startle even worse at that, his words causing 2 jolts to run through both of their bodies. He's never been so brazen in front of the rest of their club before, of course, so it's no wonder that they both got atomic red as Issei tosses the bamboo sword away and then stands there, waiting patiently. Each stare at him, as if they expect him to take back the words he's already spoken, as if they can't believe he's doing this. But once they realize it's too late, they capitulate. Slowly rising to their feet, the captains of the girls' Kendo club turn to their club members. That will be all, for today. You can all go now, thank you. We'll meet again soon. Here is where Issei steps in, his decision made clear. Or you can all stay and watch. I don't really care, one way or another. The entire room goes silent and still at that. The air is electrified as both Katace and Murayama look at him with dawning understanding mixed with horror on their faces. But beneath that horror, there's just a hint of excitement, of arousal, of anticipation in each of their eyes. When they see no mercy in his gaze, they both bow their heads, hanging them really, in supplication and submission. The rest of the room may not know exactly what's going on, but it's clear that most of the girls have some idea of what's going to happen. Issei watches as a few get up and leave, their faces bright red and their eyes downcast in embarrassment. No one looks angry, though he thinks he sees a few who are most definitely disappointed in their captains. That disappointment might eventually become anger, but to be perfectly honest, Issei doesn't really care. This move isn't exactly conducive to being lazy and flying under the radar, Issei. Issei very nearly rolls his eyes as the metaphorical dragon on his shoulder speaks into his mind. True, if he goes through with this, if he goes through with playing with both Kataise and Murayama in front of the rest of the Kendo club, it'll be almost impossible to contain what happens here. Hell, he might even get punished for it, despite it all being consensual. But Issei finds he doesn't really care about the consequences of that. Maybe he's outgrowing this place. Maybe he's ready to move beyond Kyoa Academy, and this is his first step in that direction. Well, I wouldn't mind going and seeing more of the world, I suppose. There was a lot to see, wasn't there? But for now, Issei had things in the here and now to take care of. Once it becomes clear that no one else is going to leave, and that the rest of the Kendo club is intending to stay and watch, Issei clears his throat, and gestures for Murayama and Kataise to get on with it. The two girls sink to their knees once more before him, their eyes downcast, neither able to look at any of their club members right now. That's okay though, because their focus should be on him anyways. Of course, even as they both reach up and begin to pull at his pants, unbuttoning and unzipping them and then pulling them down, they don't look at him. Issei rectifies this by reaching out and sliding his hands through pink and brown locks respectively. Gripping firmly but not painfully, Issei forces their heads to tilt back just a bit, so that they have to look up at him. At the same time, his cock is finally removed from his boxers, and over a dozen girls gasp and blush and cover their mouths with their hands as they stare at it, as they watch Kataise and Murayama lean in without any prompting and stick out their tongues to lap at it. Not a single one of them looks away though, Issei notes. As their captains debase themselves right in front of their eyes, as the two girls use their tongues and mouths to bring him to full mast in front of the rest of the girls' Kendo club, absolutely no one averts their gaze. They're transfixed. If he wanted to, he probably could have gotten away with fucking them all. Still could. Issei does roll his eyes at Drake now. After all, everyone's attention is on his cock, not his face. He wasn't going to turn this into a reverse gangbang of the girls' Kendo club, no matter how much the naughty little sluts wanted it to be. He had enough on his plate already. He didn't need over a dozen girls all vying for his attention. Especially when they weren't even that special. Special? Where had that come from? Issei furrows his brow a bit, even as he pulls Kataise and Murayama away from his cock after a moment. Assume the position. The two girls exchange glances, and Issei wonders if they'll renege on their deal with him, now that it's so high stakes. They've gone this far, but there is still a bit of a leap between sucking his cock in front of the rest of the club and getting fucked by it instead. They could very easily back out now, though he's not sure if they know that. He wouldn't force them to do it. He isn't that kind of man. He's not a rapist, and if a girl doesn't want it, if he's given an unequivocal no, then Issei will walk away. This whole thing, this entire situation, it was one that Kataise and Murayama had put themselves in. They'd been the ones who approached him and demanded that he help them give a demonstration in front of the rest of the club. That first time, Issei had been sure they were just fucking with him. The deal they'd given him, the wager that they'd ended up making, it had seemed a little ridiculous. If he won against both of them, one after the other, then he would be allowed to do whatever he wanted to them. If they won, then he would have to clean up after the Kendo club as well as do their dirty laundry for a week. Obviously, he'd won. Obviously, he hadn't expected either of them to fulfill their end of the bargain that first time through. But when they had, Issei could admit that he'd enjoyed taking their virginities. Claiming Kataise and Murayama for himself had felt good. Just as it felt good now, watching as they slowly turn away from him in unison, as they reach back and pull down their pants to expose their pert little behinds. They're not wearing panties, neither of them. A couple of little sluts. His little sluts. They press their faces into the mat, and they lift their hips up into the air, and the entire room holds its collective breath as Issei kneels behind them, his cock in his hand. Of course, he doesn't fail to notice how Murayama and Kataise are holding hands as they wait for him to pick one of them to fuck first. Not only are their fingers intertwined with one another between their bodies, they have their heads turned so that they can stare into each other's eyes the entire while. Issei almost wishes he had two cocks in that moment, so he could fuck them both at the same time. If only I had a physical body, I could take one while you took the other. But alas, it's just Issei and his single cock, metaphorical soul dragon notwithstanding. Moving into position behind Kata's, Issei takes hold of the pink's hips and thrusts into her. She cries out from the penetration, and that cry is followed up by a moan as he begins to fuck her with quick, powerful thrusts, right then and there. The rest of the room is still quiet. None of the girls watching their captain get defiled by what is probably the first cock they've ever seen are moving. Some might not even be breathing right now, though they're all certainly staring. Issei basks in the attention. It surprises him, actually. He likes it. He likes being watched. He likes being the center of attention. Even if moments before he'd viewed them all as unimportant, his audience was playing their part now. He didn't need to know their names or who they each were to have them watch and enjoy the sight of him fucking Kata's from behind. After a few minutes of thrusting, Issei pulls out and switches over to Murayama without warning. The brunette whimpers, and then yelps when he reaches forward and takes her long ponytail in hand, using it to force her back to arch up. Kata's still holds her hand and watches her, but now Murayama is forced to face forward, forced to make eye contact with more than one of her fellow students as she's thoroughly plowed by Issei's cock. He keeps switching things up from there, never spending too long fucking either Kata's or Murayama. They still come, the both of them, and it's a shameful sight to see indeed, watching them orgasm around his length time and time again, their defeat ingrained into the eyes of every other member of the Kendo club that's chosen to stay and watch. However, when Issei finally comes, he doesn't do it inside. They haven't earned that. Instead, he grabs them both up by their hair and pulls them around to face him. Their cheeks smush together as Issei allows his ejaculate to splatter all over their features. He covers them in his seed, giving them both a proper facial, and then he drops them, letting them fall to the ground, panting and moaning for breath. Rising to his feet, Issei lets his gaze sweep across the room as he tucks his cock back into his boxers and pulls up his pants. He watches them all, and each girl goes ramrod straight as he stares into her eyes. But, no. None of them are worth his time. They're all far too normal. Even Murayama and Kata's, he's not sure that he'll come back here again. Maybe he will. Just for fun. But something tells him that this isn't enough. He's gotten a taste for this, a lust for sex, but it can only be satisfied by something or perhaps someone more. Letting out a low breath, Issei steps over Kata's and Murayama, and walks out of the Kendo club's dojo, closing the door behind him as he goes. He knows he's leaving an incredibly awkward situation in the room behind him, but that's not Issei's problem. The dynamic of the Kendo club may have been changed irrevocably, but that was Kata's and Murayama's doing, not his. He was simply the implement that both of those perverts had used to fulfill their debauched desires. Still, it had been fun. And now Issei found himself wanting more. Where he would get that, he didn't know quite yet. But he knew one thing, his lazy lifestyle was coming to an end. Oh, don't tease me with things like that, Issei. You're going to get my hoped up. Issei just chuckles under his breath as he begins making his way home. XXX. Hello there, Issei Hyudo. I'm Yuuma Amano and I have the biggest crush on you. Would you please go out with me after school today? Issei just stares for a moment. If not for the fact that he could clearly sense something more to this girl than her outward appearance would suggest, he might think this had to do with the Kendo club. Otherwise, why would anyone be as forward as that? And yet, even if this was somehow tied to the events that had taken place yesterday, there was also something more going on. Because there was no denying the feeling of tainted divinity that the girl in front of him was giving off. Good eye, Issei. She definitely smells of fallen angel, and not just like one's been rubbing off on her either. That brings some lecherous and likely blasphemous images to Issei's mind. He doesn't bother dispelling them though, because really, he's not particularly religious given everything. Still, the girl for lack of a better word is still staring at him expectantly, waiting for an answer. Is he going to say yes to her? Is he going to say no? Well, that's easy enough. Sure, I'll go on a date with you. He isn't going to deny her that. Even if it's a trap. Issei likes the idea of springing it. Better to remain seemingly oblivious, than perhaps tip her off to the fact that he knows more than he should. In response, this, Yuuma Amano, lights up with excitement, looking to all the world like she's just been made the happiest schoolgirl ever. Oh thank you. Yay, I'm Issei's girlfriend now. I can't wait to see you later. And then she's gone, just like that. Issei stares after her, resisting the urge to scratch his head in confusion. Who did she think she was trying to fool, really? That was just, maybe if he was a complete idiot and obsessed with tits over everything else, her little act might have actually sucked him in. Or if you didn't have the refined senses of a dragon, to be able to tell she was a fallen angel. Or that, sure. But even if he was a normal human, issei liked to think that he would have been able to sense the stranger danger vibes coming off that girl from a mile away. He'd have to be a moron not to. Regardless, spending time thinking about what ifs was pointless. Especially when he had the rest of the day to plan out exactly how this date with this fallen angel was going to go. XXX. Issei Hayuda? Issei blinks, stopping in the hall as a familiar face steps in front of him, barring his path. Wearing spectacles and a pristine copy of the girl's school uniform, with long, black hair, the girl in front of him is undeniably Tsubaki Shinra. It's kind of hard not to know who she is, of course. Not only is she the vice president of the student council, thus making her one of the few people he sees on stage at pretty much every school assembly and event, she's also a devil, a member of one of the two peerages that reside within Kyoto Academy. Issei cocks his head to the side, his hands nonchalantly in his pockets as he stares at her. Yes? That's me. Tsubaki just nods, pushing her glasses up her nose. She has a bit of a reputation for being a serious sort of girl. There are rumors that she doesn't know how to smile, because it was deemed unnecessary in her scholastic advancement. Issei thought that was a little silly. Still, Tsubaki was currently doing her best to make it seem like those rumors were true. She was just shy of glaring at him. As I thought. My name is Tsubaki Shinra, Student Council Vice President. Please come with me, if you would. The Student Council President, Sana Satrai, needs to have a word with you. Now this was almost definitely about the Kendo Club. Issei had been flying under the Devil's radar for the entire time he'd been at Kyoto Academy so far. Neither peerage had so much as looked in his direction until now. It seemed he'd begun attracting attention, whether he liked it or not. And yet, staring at Tsubaki, his blood was singing for him to do something, for him to take. So perhaps he did like it. Perhaps this was what Issei had wanted, unknowingly or otherwise. Before he can say anything, however, another voice rings out just inches behind him, and a moment later a pair of breasts is wrapped around his arm as he's suddenly hugged tightly. Issei, there you are. You're going to be late for your first meeting at the Occult Research Club. Don't worry though, Bucko sent me to come get you. Ah, this woman isn't bothering you, is she? Yep. He was definitely on their radar now. Because the girl who'd just inserted herself quite forcibly into the conversation was none other than Akeno Yuuma. She wasn't part of the student council, but she was widely considered one of the most beautiful girls in school. Right alongside the head of the occult research club that she'd mentioned, Rias Gremory. It was amusing that a bunch of devils had taken on the guise of the occult research club in order to hide among humans. Almost as amusing as the fact that another peerage of more serious and rules-oriented devils had become the student council. Regardless, Tsubaki has gone stiff at Akeno's arrival. Yuuma, what do you think you're doing? Akeno just smiles sweetly. Why, I'm making sure Issei gets where he belongs, of course. Don't you worry about a thing. The president needs to have a word with Mr. Hayuda before he goes anywhere, least of all with the likes of you. Well, Bucko gave me specific instructions to make sure Issei doesn't get lost along the way to his destiny, and I can't disappoint her, now can I? He supposed the conversation was probably meant to be going over his head. It wasn't though, not truly. Issei could read between the lines easily enough. He'd finally made himself noticeable, and after investigating, or perhaps not investigating, after all it'd only been a day, both peerages had decided to try and recruit him into their ranks. Though, it was possible that Sana Satrai did not want to do so and was merely planning on telling him off for engaging in sexual activities in front of a bunch of innocent girls. Either way, Tsubaki and Akeno were now fighting over him, sniping at each other and glaring daggers with a surprising intensity as they verbally sparred back and forth. Meanwhile, Issei figured he had options, now. Really, it was a toughie. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do, but luckily, the two beautiful devils were giving him plenty of time to think it over. For starters, there was Yuuma to think of. While Issei wasn't overly invested in what was obviously a fake disguise designed to entrap him in some way, he was interested in the fallen angel behind it. If he went with either Tsubaki or Akeno, he was likely to piss said fallen angel off. What she would do next, he wasn't sure, but it was entirely possible that upon discovering his involvement with devils, she might cut her losses altogether and walk away. Issei didn't want that. He wanted her. Wait, he wanted her? That was something he hadn't fully realized until now. Though, it led to another realization. He also wanted Akeno and Tsubaki. Hell, if he met with either peerage, Issei was sure he would want all of them as well. There was this desire building up inside of him, a desire to take and conquer and hoard. But where to begin? Should he blow both Tsubaki and Kendo off, and by proxy, their female kings? He could go on the date with Yuuma and find out what her deal was. Or, he could choose one of them. But then, who to parley with first? Should he pick the student council over the occult research club and see what Sana had to say, or should he go along with Akendo's lie and find out what the occult research club was really about? Yuuma, Tsubaki, or Kendo? One way or another, Issei was in it now. And truth be told, he was somewhat excited to see what came next. It only took Issei a few moments to decide that he wasn't going to pick either of these girls over the other. He couldn't very well blow off Yuuma, right? He'd made a prior obligation, even if she was a stinking fallen angel. That probably wasn't fair. In truth, she'd smelled quite nice, and as far as Issei was aware, fallen angels were bad guys or anything like that. Except for the minor detail that they'd done something to be kicked out of heaven. But then, he was currently watching two devils bicker over him as well, and he'd been going to school with them for a while now with no issues, so. Luckily, Issei doesn't have to actually say anything to make Kendo and Tsubaki leave him alone, because a moment later, the former lets go of him because of a particularly scathing comment from the latter, and stalks up to her, getting in her face. While the two big-breasted beauties might be moments away from a cat fight, Issei knows an opening when he sees one. Unfortunate, because it would have been interesting to see how they fought over him while trying to hide what they actually were from him, but in the end, needs must. Making sure the two are fully distracted with one another, Issei turns and walks away. Yep, simple as that. If he'd tried to run, the noise would have most certainly attracted their attention. So he just walks, casually, and not once does he hear either of them calling after him or chasing him down as he leaves Kyoa behind and steps outside the school's front gates to find Yuuma waiting for him. Issei, over here. I was worried you might not come. Lifting an eyebrow at that, the brown-haired young man cocks his head to the side. You were? Why is that? I did agree to go out with you, after all. Yuuma blushes, and once again he has to applaud her act, as she ducks her head shyly and tucks some of her hair back behind her ear in what's clearly meant to be a sort of nervous tick. Well, it's just, you seem so cool, and I'm, well. Issei rolls his eyes. Was this what her research of him told her he liked? Stepping up to the tittering girl, Issei slides his arms around her, and promptly grabs her ass with both hands. Her eyes go wide, and for a moment, he sees beyond the facade as she looks up at him with the beginning of fury in her eyes. But he pretends not to see that, already leaning in to capture her lips in a deep kiss as he was. His tongue slips out and into her mouth, and after a moment of tension in which he's not sure whether she's going to attack or not, Yuuma finally finds it in her to melt into his embrace, her hands up against his chest between their bodies, but not attempting to push him away. Issei takes advantage of her feigned submission to grope and squeeze her absolutely astounding ass for a moment, as well as make out with her, right there in front of the school. They were technically off school grounds, so it was probably fine. Not like Yuuma actually went to Kyoa Academy anyways. Regardless, Issei pulls back finally, and while he keeps his hands on the dark-haired girl's ass, he does lean backwards enough to look down at her with a cocky smile on his face. You seemed like the confident sort when you worked up the courage to ask me on a date earlier this morning. And I said yes, didn't I? So have more confidence in yourself. I'm expecting you to show me a good time, Yuuma. She stares at him for a good few moments, her expression unreadable. Then, a smile blossoms across her face, with just a bit of an impish quality to it. Isn't it the guy who's supposed to show the girl a good time, Issei? Chuckling, Issei finally does let go of Yuuma's ass, amused to see that the fallen angel is capable of playing along. He's curious just how far he can push her on this little date, though he expects her to lead him into some sort of trap or ambush pretty swiftly. Regardless, the young man just shrugs and then offers his arm to the young woman before him. It's also the guy who usually asks the girl on the date. I figure a strong, upstanding example of femininity like yourself would be above such archaic practices. Was I wrong? His eyes sparkle with amusement and he can practically see the fallen angel's gears turning in her head past the human facade she's still trying to maintain. Eventually, a bit of something else leaks through Yuuma's features, and she lifts her nose into the sky rather snootily while taking his arm in her own. You were not. I'm going to blow your socks off, Issei Hyuda. Issei grins, and unable to resist, leans in to lay a kiss atop Yuuma's head and smell her hair. At the same time, he mutters into her ear at a sub-vocal wavelength, his tone guttural and deep in a way he knows gets the engines of human girls at least revving all nice and quick. Promises, promises. Judging by the way Yuuma shudders, it either has the same effect on her, or she's an even better actor than he thought. Either way, it seems that their date is finally starting. XXX. To issei's surprise, the disguised fallen angel does not immediately lead him into an ambush, or some dark back alley of the city where she can turn around and do whatever dastardly thing she wants to do to him with no witnesses. No, instead, she took him shopping. Or rather, then went shopping together, though more as a joke than anything else. Trying on silly shirts, or bands, or the like. She seemed to be enjoying herself, so Issei went along with it, because really, what else was he supposed to do? At the end of the day though, it all had to be an act. Unless this particular fallen angel just wanted to play around and pretend to be a human with him, or something like that. The thought that she might actually be interested in starting a normal, mundane relationship with him did cross Issei's mind, but he quickly discarded it as the height of foolishness. After all, he was who he was. What were the chances that a fallen angel would pick him for a normal, mundane romance? There had to be more to it than that. Coincidences like that simply didn't happen, ever. Regardless, eventually they leave the store, and head over to a small diner next. Seeing a chance to have a bit more fun with this whole encounter, Issei doesn't bat an eyelash when Yuuma orders the most expensive parfait they have on the menu. He simply gets himself a drink as well and waits with her for it to arrive. They sit across from one another, and he watches as she takes small bites of her rather large treat with the tiny spoon provided. Honestly, given how small that spoon is, it'll take her about 2 hours to finish the thing she's ordered, even going at a rather swift pace. But that's alright, because Issei intends to distract her in the worst way possible. Slipping his foot out of his shoe is easy enough. Sliding the sock-clad appendage across the floor to where Yuuma is sitting is easier still. He watches her, sipping casually from his drink, as he makes contact with her ankle and begins to slide his toes up the inside of her leg. Yuuma freezes, and for a moment, the facade slips again. Though, Issei is intrigued by the fact that it's not outrage or anger that he sees in her eyes for the split second that her real self shines through this go-around, but instead something akin to anticipation. Then she manages to pull herself back, and Yuuma blushes as she makes eye contact with him, acknowledging that she knows he's touching her, something of an accusing stare, as if she thinks he'll blush and stop just because she's non-verbally called him out. Issei just grins instead, and slides his foot up further, past her knee. His heel comes to rest on the edge of the booth that Yuuma is sat upon. Her eyes go wide at that, and she hides behind her parfait. Issei. Issei just cocks his head to the side. Yes, Yuuma? Something the matter? Ha. You've got her now. Oh man, this is going to be good. The young man valiantly resists the urge to roll his eyes or react in any way to the perverted dragon buried in his soul. Though, they're both perverts, to be fair. They're just confident perverts. Seeing this, the fallen angel trying to pass herself off as a human girl infatuated with him clearly decides that she's supposed to find his confidence, his cockiness, attractive. Or perhaps she actually does find it attractive. Still blushing, Yuuma ducks her head and focuses on her sweet treat, her eyes no longer meeting his own. Issei doesn't let that stop him, of course. If anything, it only spurs him on further. The top half of his foot comes forward, and as he expected, he slides along Yuma's inner thighs, before his toes come into contact with her panty-clad crotch. The young woman lets out an eep. In response, one that's loud enough to draw some glances, but though some people admire her beauty and give him the stink eye for daring to be so lucky, no one pays them any mind, not really. At least, not at first. Because Issei isn't letting up. As Yuuma continues to work her way through the parfait that she's not likely to ever finish, Issei works his magic, teasing her with the ball of his foot, with his toes, pressing into her in all the right places. She tries to trap him between her thighs, or perhaps she's attempting to push him out, but Issei isn't having it. He works around her, and continues to grind into her cunt, which he can already feel getting wet through the sole of his sock. Still, Issei doesn't let up. Even as Yuuma begins to mewl and moan, even as she pants and her sizable chest jiggles in her top from her breathlessness, Issei doesn't stop. Eventually, Yuuma has to push the parfait away from herself, her hands clutching at the edge of the table instead as she squeezes her eyes shut, trying to keep a handle on her emotions, trying to hold back the sensations he's forcing upon her. That's when Issei pushes just a bit of his essence through the ball of his foot, into the fallen angel's sopping wet quim. Yuuma's eyes shoot wide open, and she comes with a squeal, creaming her panties and even drenching his sock as well for good measure as she shakes and spasms, her chest bouncing all over the place, her eyes going crossed from the pleasure. Issei grins, knowing that it's not faked or forced. No, that was a real orgasm, experienced by the very real female sat across the table from him. Yuuma is still recovering, when the waitress who originally took their order comes over, a look of concern on her face. Is everything alright over here? Young lady, are you okay? For a moment, Yuuma looks like a deer caught in the headlights. Issei thinks he sees a flash of indignation under her humiliated and embarrassed facade, and he knows that it's directed at him, even as he gives the waitress a saucy grin and gestures to the half-eaten parfait. My girlfriend just really likes the dish, I suppose. She couldn't get enough. Ah, but perhaps it was a bit much for her. Can we get our check please? I think she's about done. Wouldn't you say, Yuuma? Why yes. I'm finished. Issei resists the urge to chuckle, and then he has to do so again when the receipt that he's given after paying has the waitress phone number on it. He makes sure to accidentally flash the set of digits to Yuuma as he folds the receipt up and tucks it away in his wallet. When he stands and offers his arm to the dark-haired young woman, she's glaring daggers at the waitress back, so much so that he wouldn't be surprised if her uniform caught fire, right then and there. It doesn't though, and Issei lets Yuuma lead him out of the diner and down the street, once she finally takes hold of his arm. The sun is beginning to set, and he imagines this is about when things will get nasty. XXX. It's rather obvious what's coming, as Yuuma leads him away from the already dying crowds and over to a remote part of a nearby park. As the sun sets overhead, turning the air a burnt orange, the disguised fallen angel breaks away from him and runs up to the fountain. Lifting an eyebrow, Issei stops and watches her, ready for whatever her plan is. Can I ask you a question? In honor of our first date, there's something I'd like you to do for me. To commemorate this special moment. As she speaks, she moves closer, bobbing up and down, a clear attempt to draw his eyes to her jiggling, bouncing breasts and distract him. Staring down at her as she waits for his response, Issei considers ending the charade here and now and taking the first move, but there's always the ever so small chance that she's not hostile, even if all of his senses are telling him otherwise. And what would that be? Slowly, Yuuma's head comes up, a small smile on her face as she lets the facade she's struggled to maintain at multiple points of their date fall away completely. Her eyes are filled with death and danger, and the cutesy tone of voice she's had disappears entirely, to be replaced by a slightly deeper, albeit still feminine voice. Would you die for me? That's about what he expected. With a sigh, Issei reaches out, and flicks Yuuma in the forehead. She's more than close enough for him to do so, and he watches dispassionately as she flips end over end from the blow, slamming into the side of the water fountain with enough force to crack the stone and see the thing start to leak out around her. Eyes wide with fury, the disguised fallen angel wastes no time in retaking her true form, even as a red welt grows into prominence on her forehead. Issei stands there and admires her, even as she scrambles to her feet. She's like a more matured version of her human disguise, taller by a few inches, much bustier, and with curvy hips to die for, that probably lead to an ass that just won't quit, though unfortunately Issei can't see it from this angle. But the most important thing of course are the blackened wings on her back, which Yuuma uses to propel herself up into the air, flapping overhead as she snarls down at him. You! How dare you lay a hand on me? Issei just looks up at her and smiles easily. I've done much more than that today, haven't I, Yuuma? For a moment, her face flushes in embarrassment, but then a vicious smile spreads across her face. I suppose you are more interesting than I thought, Issei Hyuda. Still, you fell right into my trap all the same. Your overconfidence has led you to an early grave. In her hands, a beam of light takes form, before solidifying into what can only be some sort of hard light construct in the form of a spear. She spins it about, and points it at him, smirking easily without a care in the world. Time to die. And then she lunges forward, her wings beating hard to propel her through the air towards him. Her spear aims for his heart, to take him out in one single impaling stab. Of course, it never actually reaches said organ. It doesn't even reach his chest. As Yuuma or whatever her name is closes in, Issei holds up a hand. Just as the fallen angel transformed in what seemed like a split second, so does Issei. Rather than connecting with human flesh, the spear of light heading his way smashes into a palm of red scales, and promptly shatters. But her weapon breaking does not stop the momentum of the fallen angel it belongs to. In one fell swoop, Yuuma loses her spear, and finds her neck clutched in a clawed gauntlet, made of dragon scales. Issei squeezes, and the fallen angel chokes as her hands come up to scramble at his transformed arm to no avail. WYHRK. You dash. Issei smiles as Yuuma's eyes bulge and she tries but fails to talk around his tightened grip. From where I'm standing, Yuuma, the one who was overconfident was you, it seems. I don't know what you think you know about me, but clearly, you didn't do your homework. Please. Issei loosens his grip just enough to let her speak, even as he brings his other hand up and presses the draconic claws that have manifested on that limb as well against her exposed belly, ready to disembowel her at a moment's notice. She doesn't fail to take note of this, and Issei relishes the fear he sees in the fallen angel's eyes. She's finally taking him seriously. What is it? I am sorry. Please, forgive me. I did not know. Spare me. I can be of use to you. How quickly she changed. It seemed this one was a coward, and all too eager to save her own skin. The question was, what did Issei want to do with her, now that he had her? He could kill her outright, though it seemed somewhat of a waste. Still, if he killed her now with no one else around, perhaps her death would not be tracked back to him, and he could just go back to his casual life at Kyoah. Unlikely, given the devils had taken an interest in him due to his decisions regarding the Kendo club. He could take her to them. Not having any ties to either the orc or the student council at this moment, he would need to get in contact with both to try and find a way to hand her over to the two groups. Maybe they might leave him alone if he did so, a sign of good faith, an offering, or what have you. But something balked within him at the idea. He didn't like the thought of giving up what was his. But then, if he already thought of this fallen angel as his, perhaps he should keep her. She was already offering her services to him. Demanding that she pledge her loyalty to him, well, she would probably still try to betray him at some point down the road, but he could enjoy her in a variety of different ways until that time came. And then there was the final option, and the least optimal in his opinion. He could let her go. If he released her now with a warning, would she leave him alone? Could he get the devils to leave him alone as well, and be content with that? It definitely seemed like a silly choice, but part of Issei did long to return to flying under the radar, even if that no longer seemed to truly be possible. One way or another, with a fallen angel in his clutches, it was clear Issei had a choice to make.
Sorry guys for keeping this one going on longer, and yeah, hope you all guys enjoyed the video. Hope to see you next time. See you guys, bye.